The further down the ladder in the alphabet, the greater the potential for an upset stomach following the meal. Labels are indeed an effective tool to inform consumers about the quality of a product or service. You can think of energy labels that tell us about the energy efficiency of a TV or a fridge as an example. Just looking at an IoT device, however, the cameras that we use to monitor our front doors, the watches that we wear to track our health, as consumers, we are not very well equipped to determine the security of an internet-connected device. A label would empower consumers to make informed purchasing decisions at the point of sale. In fact, research shows that buyers are willing to pay a 30% premium for secure IoT products. Thus, vendors could generate more revenue as they now can sell to consumers who are willing to pay for security. This would incentivize much needed upfront cybersecurity investments. But unless there is a label based on testing and certification against the security baseline, the information asymmetry between sellers and buyers can lead to a problematic under-provisioning of cybersecurity. The cost of insecurity become apparent when industry and government need to respond to cyber incidents, clean up hacked network, and deal with the consequences of sensitive data breaches. Nobel laureate economist Georgia Kurloff described this information asymmetry in the used cars market, which over time degraded into a market of lemons, a market consisting of mostly defective, expensive to repair cars. His insights are applicable here. If there are no clear quality indicators, we may very well face a lemons market for IoT. But labels could help overcome this cybersecurity and market conundrum. There is indeed good news on the horizon. There have been promising movements on security labels in industry governments as of late. President Biden's 2021 executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity initiated the cybersecurity labeling pilot, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology is in the process of seeking input on IoT cybersecurity criteria and secure software development practices for a labeling program. Singapore and Finland, two other well-known examples in this space, are actually ahead in this development. Singapore launched its cybersecurity labeling scheme for consumers late last year and is currently offering certification and labeling for Wi-Fi routers and smart home hubs. Finland, also mostly focusing on consumer smart devices, grants its IoT products labels that satisfy the information security requirements set by the National Cybersecurity Center of Finland. But also private third-party certification providers have recognized that the testing and certification of our IoT devices is not only important overall for cybersecurity, but will become a valuable revenue stream for them. The Underwriters Labs, a global safety certification company, introduced a label-based IoT security rating, and the global standard for IoT security, or IOXT for short, which counts major internet and tech companies among its members, has developed an IoT certification program against 8 categories and multiple security levels. I stop here with my brief overview of labeling efforts and hand over to Vaibhav. He will tell you that not all security labels are created equal and emphasize the importance of design of labels, but also the broader ecosystem to make a labeling regime effective and successful. Dr. Garg, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks for that great setup, Andreas. So, as Andreas mentioned, there's been a great deal of activity in the IoT labeling space, both in the public sector and the private sector. A lot of it has been informed by the success of labeling in other risk domains. Andreas mentioned food and energy. However, cybersecurity is a slightly different risk domain. So, for example, if you consider energy, we have a unit of energy consumption. We don't really have a unit for cybersecurity. So in the absence of an objective measure, we have to leverage essentially some kind of a subjective guideline. Now, there's no dearth of guidelines, standards, best practices in the IoT space. There's certainly the NIST IoT baseline. CTA has something called CTA 2088. there's the C2 consensus, there's DCMS. There's a lot of choices, and there's cost to adopting a particular choice over another. Now, let's say for the sake of argument that we can all agree that there's a particular class of security standards that are relatively equivalent, and that's the one that we're going to follow. Your next challenge is going to be to decide what kind of label you want. So labels themselves come in 3 different designs. So you have something like a binary label, so that would be something like a USDA label. So a binary label is either present or absent. Another type would be a graded label. So with graded labels, you can also assert that you have security level 1, security level 2, security level 3, and so forth. And then finally, you have a label where you can define not necessarily security levels, but you can actually provide kind of a list of the different components that you're using to provide security for that particular device. So something similar to a nutrition label. So all 3 different styles of designs have their own promises and constraints. So if you think about the binary labels are highly usable. A consumer merely has to check whether the label is present or absent. However, you do need the consumer to know that the label exists. The other challenge with binary labels is they create a dichotomous thinking. So a consumer might assume that any device that has a label has similar levels of security, whereas any device that does not have a label is similarly insecure. Now you can get around that problem by using a graded label. So you can say, well, my device is 1 secure, 2 secure, 3 secure. The challenge there is, as I mentioned before, you don't really have a definition of security. So first, we had to come to an agreement of what is a definition of security. Now we have to also define additional kind of requirements for the different tiers of security, and that can be pretty challenging. Then the final one, of course, is a nutrition label style of label. Now, those labels do provide the greatest amount of information, so they're great for a technically literate user. However, they tend to be highly unusable for consumers with low literacy. Of course, because there's a lot of information on the label, you also need the consumer to actually spend some time understanding what that information is actually conveying. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, we decide that there is a particular label that is the right kind of label style to go with. Well, we also need to make sure that those labels and the security assurance that they are asserting evolves with the evolving threat landscape. So just because a device was secure, in 2010, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, similarly secure in 2021. So that's the other challenge that we have to solve, is how do we make sure that once a label is on the device, a consumer understands that a label that has been awarded in 2014 is not necessarily providing the same security guarantees as a label that has been awarded in 2021. I think for the most part, it is unlikely that you will find that a particular labeling style or a particular labeling regime or a particular definition of security is going to be applicable across a diversity of IoT devices. But that's the challenge that we need to solve, and it's important to understand that labels can come in different sizes and they can have different impacts on the consumers that they are targeting. Thank you.